You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
The source of truth for the MedTech industry.
Coexists with the prophets.
Robot understands things automatically.
#1 show in the MedTech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high. A lot of things.
State of MedTech with your host, Omar M. Khatib.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Super excited about this episode. As you know, I have a thing for some of the early class of intuitive surgical. Yes, some of you guys give me a hard time, like, oh, why do you always cover, these early class people from Intuitive? Well, Intuitive was probably one of the greatest success stories, in my opinion, in our industry. It went through a lot of ups and downs, struggled a lot in the early days, and somehow made it to be one of the most premier med device companies on planet Earth. And by the way, I'm going to look this up right now because you've heard me mention this before. Many of you haven't. If I look today, Medtronic's market cap, who has, thousands of products, right? And it's the world's largest med device company. Their market cap is $115 billion today. Intuitive is at $137 billion, and they got 2 products, right? So it's a pretty impressive spread there. So those early days were really dog years and really going to war with the traditional way of doing surgery, specifically radical prostatectomy. So one of the people that I've been wanting to have on the show for a long time is Jim Alecxih. Jim Alecxih started off at Intuitive Surgical as a director of sales and rose very quickly to a level of VP of sales. And, in his last 4 years there, he was a senior vice president of North America, South America, Australia, and New Zealand. Just to kind of highlight some significant accomplishments for him, he developed and implemented strategic plans for about $1.8 billion in revenue generation, which was about 90% of overall corporate revenues. He maintained accountability for a $275 million expense budget, consistently delivering target results under budget. He exceeded revenue budget for 51 consecutive quarters over a 14-year period, right? Pretty wild. Select benchmarks for revenue growth: $175 million in 2004, $540 million in 2007, $1.2 billion in 2010, and $1.8 billion in 2014. As a vice president of U.S. sales, he also drove an install base from 253 to 2,200 systems, and increased procedures from 36,000 to 400,000 per year, and increased the headcount from 48 to 850. So there's not a lot of people in the MedTech universe who've accomplished something like that at that level of growth. He went on to be an executive at a variety of other companies. He was VP of worldwide sales at Nevro for a little bit. He was chief commercial officer at ViewRay, And so in this episode, we talk about those times during Intuitive, those dog years, as I like to call them. And this is why this episode is called War Stories from the Trenches, right? And so we highlight all that and more. Now, a couple of shout outs to some sponsors. Number one, Clary. Clary has been a phenomenal sponsor for me in the show for over 3 quarters now. We're renewing again. I just wanted to welcome back to the State of MedTech. Well, not really welcome back, but to say thank you for continuing to support the show. If you are a company that uses Salesforce.com for your CRM, you have to protect your investment, because a lot of us have an idea of what Salesforce is, and then we buy it and we realize, oh, wait, this is really expensive. We got to maintain it ourselves. So what Clary does, essentially, it integrates into Salesforce and does a couple things. One big thing it does is that it automates a lot of the data entry that the reps have to do into Salesforce. A lot of the things that you need Salesforce to do, the data has to be good going in. And a lot of the data that's going in is not good because the reps are too busy. It's a lot of work. So Clary automates that data going in. And then what they do is they make revenue, right? The idea of running revenue, a collaborative process. Usually that's been limited only to sales, but in this complicated world of medical device sales, right? We got to think about revenue as something that's being owned and collaborated on with sales, with marketing, and clinical success. And so their platform plugs into your Salesforce CRM, starts giving you predictable revenue, giving you ideas as to which deals to focus on, what to do for pipeline velocity, and more. I can't speak more highly enough about it. This is why they were the first main sponsor of my show, because they fit the mission that I'm trying to accomplish, which is to elevate how we sell and market in this industry. So if you're interested to learn more, click the link below in the show notes to click directly to their life science page. They've picked up some really big names and big logos in our industry as customers, or go to clari.com, CLARI.com to learn more. And finally, if you're a startup and you need help growing your commercial traction, right? Finding those early adopters, we here at Khatib & Co, we want to work with you. One of the things that we do is we use content and social media to help your CEO, your founder, and your team reach more physicians, find ways to get those early adopters, because it's really like finding a needle in the haystack, right? And we use social media to scale that out. There's some companies that we're working with now that they don't have any commercial team, but we are essentially their commercial partner, laying that foundation down on the sales and marketing side, creating content to raise awareness, which, by the way, also helps with investor awareness. So if you're interested to learn more about that, book some time with me. Go to khatibandco.com to learn more. Now, let's get on to our episode with Jim Alecxih. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show, and really excited for today's guest. We did a few of these war stories and lessons episodes in the past, and you all seem to love it. I think of all the different success stories in MedTech, there's one that's always been maybe kind of a weird obsession of mine, just because I think it was just the timing of it, the stories I heard, and of course I've been mentored by a lot of people out of it, which is Intuitive Surgical, and more specifically the early days of Intuitive, which was from around 1999, 2000, all the way to 2010. And then in some weird way, I'm this like indirect historian where I've had a lot of people on the show. One of those names of the early class of Intuitive that made Intuitive what it is Jim Alecxih. Jim was the senior vice president of sales over at Intuitive, somebody I've heard about for a long time, and it took about, I think, 11 or 12 years until we finally met through the power of LinkedIn. Jim is now doing some executive coaching and also commercial consulting. And I'm very happy to say, which I was very pleased about this, and I think this is the future of, I think, MedTech leadership, is that Jim is also an avid user of my software, OmniCreator. So he's getting ready to put out some great content, and you got a whole series lined up for January. So Jim, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Omar. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to sit down and talk with you.
Oh, same here. Same here. Well, before we get into it, a lot of people, at least in the, laparoscopic robotic space, are familiar with you. But for some of my audience who are not familiar with you, maybe you can give a little bit of background on who Jim Alecxih is. Like, where'd you grow up? How did you get into MedTech? Because very few of us go to college saying, oh, I'm going to go to buy sales, right? And maybe give us like sort of a little like snapshot of your career, and then we'll get into the good stuff, which is all the stories and lessons from the trenches of Intuitive.
Sure. I grew up on a family farm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, right in the middle of the Amish country. And I went to college in a small school outside of Dallas, Texas. Didn't have two nickels to rub together. And I became a paramedic, which is how I put my way through college. And it was great because you could work 24-hour shifts and put all your classes on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and work Tuesday, Thursday, 24 hours. And sometimes you'd sleep the whole time. Sometimes it would be nonstop. And so I thought I wanted to be a physician. And after 4 years of being a paramedic, I decided that was not the life for me. But I decided I wanted to get into medical device sales, and was connected with a company called Automated Instruments, which was a part of U.S. Surgical in the late 80s, early 90s, as laparoscopy started to come on board. And that was my first sales job in the medical device industry. And it was great. And you can sort of sum my career up in that I've, for the past 30 years or so, I have introduced new, innovative, proprietary technology into the operating room and healthcare environments. And so went from Intuitive Surgical to a small company called Ultracision. Some of your audience may have heard of a product called the Harmonic Scalpel, and was one of the very first sales managers for them, and we sold that to J&J. And then I went from a small company, 20 sales reps, to J&J, and they asked me to be involved in a startup called Indigo, and which was a laser for BPH. And I did that for 3 or 4 years. And then in early 2000, I got a call from my old boss at U.S. Surgical, Jerry McNamara. and he asked me to come out to California and look at a new technology called the DaVinci surgical system. And so I came in July of 2000. It didn't have any skins on it. Didn't work very well, to be honest with you. They were uncertain about what the value proposition was, where it was going to be used. We thought cardiac. And so in August of 2000, I joined Intuitive, and there were 3 of us. And then one of my good friends from Indigo was Chris Sells. And so Chris was living on the East Coast, and we needed a West Coast sales manager. And so I called Sells and said, come do this with me. And so I spent almost 15 years there. And what a great experience, lifelong memories and friends. And then in the last 8 or 9 years, I've done a couple of different things. I was a CEO of a company called Free Air and ended up selling that. Was the CEO of a company called Vive Bio, and then was a chief commercial officer for ViewRay, the Meridian, which is a system that has an MRI and a linear accelerator combined, and a great technology. And so currently I'm consulting. I'm doing some executive coaching, some commercial consulting, and just looking for either to continue to do that or for the next great opportunity. And so I'm anxious to share my thoughts with you and some of the things that I've experienced over the years in this industry.
That's great. That's great. I'll tell you what, Jim, the problem with working with, at least in the early days of robotics companies, that once you do that, it's very hard to get excited about new tech. I remember when I left Missouri Robotics, I was kind of like looking around. I'm like, okay, what's the next exciting thing? And it's just like, very hard to get excited about things. And once you do like hard, difficult, complicated technology like that, that's really all you're drawn to. So maybe a really good place to start. And again, I have a lot of notes in front of me here, like from all these like different books and stuff that I've written over the years. So I'm going to bring up things I heard. And so you're going to validate and add some color to it. So
okay.
So one of the things that with Intuitive, the DaVinci robot came out of SRI, I believe, right?
Stanford Research Institute.
Yeah,
and initially with DARPA. So the government, the initial idea was that a combat surgeon is millions of dollars and 10 years to train. And so if you had a MASH unit, for those of your audience who have seen that old show MASH.
Great show. I've seen that show. My dad watched it as a surgeon. So
imagine as they're close to the front lines, you're putting highly trained, difficult to replace people in harm's way. And so the initial value proposition was they could have a remote robot in an operating room close to the front, and the physician would be 20 or 30 miles back and would be manipulating the instruments, and so you wouldn't risk losing a surgeon. And so when DARPA exited, they sold it to Stanford Research Institute, and then in I think 95 or 96, Fred and Rob Young bought the technology and really started to develop it for commercial use.
So the first thing that I recall, and again, there's so many sayings and I guess philosophies in our industry that I think you can map back to Intuitive Surgical, and maybe prior to that to US Surgical. So originally the robot, you mentioned like it was considered to be used in cardiac, and so I don't know who said it, but at some point, and I hit something under my desk. At some point, somebody what was the aha moment that made people say like we should go into radical prostatectomy? And I think like one of the arguments is like, man, like we don't want to become a P robot, right? Because because cardiac surgery is really sexy and everything. To go into like prostate is like not exactly sexy, at least back then. What was that like? Like what's the story behind that?
Well, that was a pretty interesting conversation in the company, I have to be honest with you. And I've heard that saying where you shot for the heart and hit the prostate. Two of my initial sales efforts were St. Luke's and Methodist in Houston. And I would go talk to Dr. Cooley, who's a renowned cardiac surgeon.
That guy is a legend. And by the way, I got to just comment. I was just talking about him with my dad the other day because we don't have that as often these days, but the big rivalry in medicine was DaVinci versus Cooley. And they were like, a few miles apart in Houston, pioneering the frontier. But we were talking and, my dad and I were saying like, a lot of like the greatest minds, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, DaVinci is one of them, is like, these guys were kind of jerks. DaVinci was a notorious jerk. And for anybody who's listening who might be offended, like, he's a brilliant man, but the guy was a jerk, like big time jerk. And I met people who worked for him. But I told my dad, I was like, but I heard Dr. Cooley was like the smoothest, coolest guy. Like, he was like Dr. Wonderful for everybody. So I just had to like share that little tidbit, but please, continue.
Well, actually, they were not miles apart. They were right across the street. And I only met Dr. DaVinci a couple times. He had really retired. Cooley was still involved with one of the coolest physicians I've ever met, a guy named Bud Fraser, who's an amazing heart surgeon. And so talk about difficult personalities. I would meet with Cooley almost every week, and he would give me a new reason every week about why he wouldn't buy it. And I'll just give you one. He'd be like, operating with DaVinci is like having sex with a canoe. You'd do it once and it'd probably feel okay, but you wouldn't want to do it every day. And it's like, and we were competing against computer motion at the time. And I walked into his office and he said, "I think I've decided to buy a DaVinci." And I said, "Oh, great. Tell me why." And he goes, "Well, it's much bigger than the computer motion robot. And so when we melt it down, I'll get a lot more for the scrap metal." And so that was kind of the sales process.
That sounds like the typical like run through the mill for dealing with a surgeon. I tell people this is the hardest sales job on planet. I don't care what anybody says, because like you're dealing everything. So like back then, even now, like not only the sales and prospecting, but the install and everything. But on top of it, every single one of your customers is a lot smarter than you. It's like I can go sell software for Salesforce and I can sell to a Fortune 100 CMO. I've never been a Fortune 100 CMO, but like I've been a marketer, so there's some relation. When you're selling to a doctor, like it's just so hard. Yeah. And you get those kind of personalities,
It's pretty tough. My middle daughter wants to be in medical device sales. And so she's like, "Okay, what do I need to be successful?" And I'm like, lots of people have asked me that question. I said, if I had to boil it down to one thing, it would be pain tolerance. When somebody says no, leave, you're like, okay, so that means like 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, come back, right? That's what you hear. And you just have to have that pain tolerance and resilience. But back to the original question. So we received a video of a physician in Europe that had done a radical prostatectomy with DaVinci, early DaVinci, the standard system. And I think it was a 7-hour procedure, and then he opened. And so we watched it on fast forward, and I talk about what I know. I was like, there's no way this is a dead end. But the interesting thing about that marketplace is that it had all the elements of success that cardiac didn't. And so it wasn't consolidated. There was no dominant industrial player in urology. It was not under direct visualization. Pat Walsh had invented the nerve sparing, which was really just, finding the prostate with your fingers and peeling the nerves off the prostate. So it was very difficult. It was high risk. There was a lot of blood loss. It was very vascular structure. And so there was a huge opportunity to capture that market, and I think that's why it took off so much. And look, it was rough going in the beginning as we're trying to define a procedure, define our value proposition, train reps, all kinds of things. And to top it all off, if you look at from a hospital perspective, a cardiac surgery robot has cachet, and from a reimbursement standpoint, a physician an administrator can understand, like, okay, well, I understand why I'd spend $1 million, but for urology, first of all, they always take their procedures out of the hospital. They don't have very much political power. They don't make much money for the hospital, at least that's what they thought. And so it was a difficult market to sell, but there were elements that made it perfect to really have a beachhead in that marketplace and really launch Intuitive as a mainstream technology.
What was who was the surgeon who was the surgeon who came up with that aha moment that essentially used the DaVinci on a prostatectomy? Like who was it? When did that happen? See, like there's all these stories out here, but I don't have the details, Yeah,
it really the person who really drove the market forward in the U.S. was a guy out of Henry Ford named Manny Menon, and a phenomenal person, phenomenal surgeon. And he, on his own dime, went to Europe to learn how to do it. And he came back and really established Henry Ford as kind of the place to go for a minimally invasive prostatectomy. And they were very aggressive in advertising the program. And so once we were talking earlier about, early adopters and how early key opinion leaders can drive a market forward. And so probably the person that was most against it was a physician out of Johns Hopkins named Pat Walsh. And he was kind of the father of the previous methodology. And so you have a community a physician in Henry Ford, and you have an academic physician. And so it was very interesting to see the adoption by the society. So on one hand, people from all over the world were coming into Detroit to get their procedure done. And on the other hand, the academics were like, oh no, it's a marketing tool. It doesn't have any clinical value. It doesn't have any data behind it. And so those were interesting market dynamics that we had to contend with.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think what was most interesting back then is, even up until I think 08, 09, was social media was really in its infancy. Like you really didn't have, I think the iPhone came out in 06, 07, but you didn't even have social media apps until maybe 08, I think. Right. And so when you would hear about it, you would see it on the internet and everything. So I heard like at conferences, when you guys did your exhibits, like it was just wild because like everybody was coming to see this thing like in person. What was that like? Because when I was at Mazor, and we would exhibit the robot at spine surgery conferences, like part of the training and part of the thing I prepared like our sales team for was just like, you're going to have surgeons who are just going to act like morons and they're going to just come by just to talk smack and just to get in a fight with you. Like literally I'll never forget, like, no offense to anybody, because I'm from the South, but there was this one doctor out of like Wyoming or Montana. And this guy had like the most bastardized version of a like Southern draw mixed with some like middle America accent. It was so bad. And he came over and he's like, tell me about this here thing. And I was like, oh man, here we go. So what was that like at the exhibit hall for you guys? Like, give us some stories about what was that like? You must have had people coming by and just throwing rocks.
Oh my goodness. First of all, Intuitive back then, maybe not so much now, but back then was notoriously fiscally conservative. And so they would...
How fiscally conservative? I know where you're going. How fiscally conservative, Jim?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I was the VP of sales before I ever had my own room on any meeting with Intuitive. Chris Sells was my roommate for 6 years.
So I just want to repeat that. So when you guys would have your national sales meetings and everything, you're an executive salesperson. You guys shared rooms.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
Oh, yeah. I would I would go to California and I wouldn't even think of first class. We'd sit in the back but they would always get one of the worst booth spaces. We used to tease, we'd be like, wherever the restrooms are, that's where you could find the DaVinci. And so they would have to look for us. And so, early on, just like you said, people would be like, oh, this is a big marketing tool. This doesn't have anything. But, what they would also see is a line of 40 or 50 people that would be waiting for a test drive. And literally in some of those early urology meetings, we'd give people the hook. They would want to, it would be like a 1-minute test drive, and somebody would want to spend 3, 4, 5 minutes, but you had 40 or 50 people waiting, and you'd be like, okay, you need to go. And so, yeah, it was a little bit of both. A lot of excitement in the marketplace once it started to take off, but with any new technology, when they don't understand it and it's disruptive, they always go to the same places. It's slow, it's expensive, it doesn't have any value. And so that's their own process of selling themselves, wherever that physician is on the curve of adoption. I'm sure Jeff Moore's adoption curve, wherever they are, it usually is the same objections, and I used to say to physicians, they'd be like, it's too slow. And I'd be like, really, when you look at it, where is speed is speed of operation in your top 5 things? Because I certainly would never go to a surgeon who said, my claim to fame is I do these procedures quicker than anybody else. I'd be like, well, thanks, but I'm going to go to the slow guy who's really meticulous. And so they use speed or cost or one of those things, and it's really not. They're just in the process of going through their own adoption cycle.
Completely agree. And by the way, when I so again, I'm this. I feel like this the son of Intuitive in some weird way, because being mentored by Chris, some of the guys who I was mentored by out of Intuitive. So Chris Sells, Chris Prentice, Tim Morawski, Ken Husted, some other people, Joe O'Connor. There's a long list. And so part of that is there's some required reading that I got. So when I joined Mazor, I was fresh out of medical school. So the only thing I knew how to do was just study and teach myself. So I would ask what should I be reading? And a lot of people didn't have suggestions except for the guys who came out of Intuitive. And so on my back shelf here, and I think you'll appreciate it. So Barbarians at the Gate.
That's a great one.
That's one.
Bureaucrats to
Barbarians to bureaucrats. Yeah, so Barbarians to Bureaucrats. Hardball. Yeah. Hardball is another one.
Hope is not a strategy.
Hope is not a strategy. I know I don't have that one.
That's a good one.
I gotta get that. But of course, the foundation, and I just pulled this out, is Crossing the Chasm. So this is my version. I was fortunate enough to have Jeff Moore on my show because I was writing about different versions of this, and I had my own adaptation, and he I finally got to meet a brilliant guy. But I just want to show this because this thing is beat to hell. This is all these earmarks. I have all these notes, and this is so I had one in 2012 or 13, but I lost it in 15. So this one I had to buy a new one in 2017, and this one is just I need to buy a new one. But it's just such a great book. This needs to be attached to your hip if you're in this industry. If you want to be taken seriously, in my opinion, you got to know this. I have a litmus test when I show this chart on certain presentations. I'm like, have you seen this? And when someone says no, I'm like, all right, well, let me help you along here.
I would say, if your audience is new, young in their career and new to the medical device industry, that book is a roadmap of how new technologies go from their infancy to, and you look, the reason why Intuitive's, so famous is that obviously it was highly successful, but they crossed the chasm in multiple different specialties, and that's what makes them really special. And but that book is a roadmap. It's really worth reading, and I, just like you, I use it frequently, nearly in every engagement, in every job. I use that, and some of the things that Jeff Moore.
Same here.
Really like it.
I want to go back to something. One of the things, people, you can criticize Intuitive for a variety of different things. Like any company. The one thing to this day that I tell people, I'm like, I got my own opinion about different things from Intuitive. I was like, you cannot criticize their insane level of discipline and rigor when it comes to business development. And by the way, I'm just going to say it publicly. I might lose listeners. I guarantee I'm going to get some angry emails, But like a prime example of this where I was like, oh, this will be interesting. Because, Intuitive is really well established and everything, was when J&J acquired Auris, and they were first to market with and everything. Intuitive came out with Ion a year later. And that was a textbook example of just how do you clean somebody's clock. I mean, they just wiped the floor with them. And, and I hate to admit it, but it's just true. It's unbelievable, So that level of discipline, I want to start with Computer Motion. Computer Motion was a competitor to Intuitive. So tell us what happened. What exactly happened with Computer Motion?
Well, Computer Motion was a small company out of Santa Barbara, and a competing technology. And they were more voice activated than we were. So they tried to sell us against that we didn't have any haptic feedback. And so haptic feedback for your audience is the ability to feel the tissue with your fingers through the instruments.
Because the instruments would like push back or vibrate a little bit, right?
Right. And so, what the fundamental element of Intuitive is that your senses are all intertwined. And so if you make the acuity of vision so great, you don't need haptic feedback. You know exactly. And that's why if you look, I'm sure you've seen some of the early videos where they peel a grape and some other. And so it's like you don't need haptic feedback because the vision system was so outstanding. But Computer Motion, was a different system. Probably, I would say, they weren't around. I think that they were acquired in late 2000, if I recall. But probably the biggest thing is our system was and that was the price. It was $980,000. Now you could pay net 30. That was where we negotiated, and so that's a really difficult stance for a new company with a new technology in the market to say we're not going to discount, and so our average sale price was $10,000, and Computer Motions was anywhere from I think I recall like $250,000 to $1 million, and so they were big deal makers, and so I give Lonnie Smith credit. It was very difficult as a sales manager to walk in and say, okay, I've got this unproven technology that's going into a nascent market that is that really we don't have a tremendous amount of clinical data, and it's we don't really at that point we hadn't engaged with Delaga London yet, and so we didn't really have any leasing options. It was just buy it for $980,000, kind of take it or leave it, and but what that led to was a lot of fiscal discipline, a lot of discipline in the sales force. And I mean, I could fill one of your episodes with the mistakes that were made with Intuitive, like any company. And certainly over the course of time, there's decisions that I made that I would do something different. But at the time, I tried to make the best decision. But if you look at the quality of people that have come out of Intuitive, early Intuitive, 2010 and before is what I say is early Intuitive. The Christian Babinis, the Andy Sales, and you're on mute, Omar.
Yeah, no, I have to do that because I have a young son in the background.
I understand.
I was gonna say Christian Babini, another wonderful guy. Andy Sale, also I've got a chance to meet him. I'll tell you a great story about because again, this is like story hour with Intuitive. When I first met Christian Babini, he was the VP of sales at MedTech Rosa, which was our competitor at Mazor. And I didn't know anything about him, nor did I know that he was Chris Sells' like, I think, first manager, so they had some history. And so, and I've been around the block, not only just in spine and robotics, like now that with my own company, I've been in so many different parts of the industry. There's something about ex-Intuitive and ex-US Surgical that they have kind of like this Godfather-esque swagger to them. It doesn't matter whether it's like men or women. Like I can just spot them from miles away. I don't know what it is. Like it's not what it's just something. But I remember I was at the booth and I saw Sells start, walking down the aisle, and it was a big aisle, and it was like during non-opposing hours, and Babini was walking towards him. And I like nudged him. I'm like, oh shit, that like, are they going to fight each other? And then they were like walking faster. And I'm like, what's going to happen? And then all of a sudden, like they hug each other. Christian like gives Sells a big kiss on the cheek and stuff. They're like laughing. And I was like, what the hell's going on? Cause like, this is like our arch enemy. I was like, what the hell's going on? But the coaching tree of Intuitive, and you wrote a great article about this, is that like all these people left Intuitive and they went on to like, so Andy Sales won, Christian Babini's, and they all went to be like high-ranking executive officers and had like wonderful success. That's something I should talk to my creative director. We should make a coaching map, like a visual one of like all the people who came out of early Intuitive and what they went on to do, kind of like PayPal Mafia.
Right. Well, probably I think the difference is that it's low arrogance and high confidence. And there really was very few politics in Intuitive at that time. There was, not a whole lot of arrogance. It was like, we're going to get it done. And one of the projects I'm working on is early Intuitive stories. And I
wanted to ask you, I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I was, I heard rumblings about this before you and I met. They're like, Jim Alecxih's working on a book. And I'm like, all right, well, you got to tell us more about that now.
Well, it's just some of the amazing stories. I got a call. I'll tell you one. I got a call from an area sales manager, first let me back up and say, the good and bad of early Intuitive was that we did not want to get purchased. We did not want to get bought by J&J or some of the other companies that were looking at us, and so the best way to do that was to have a high stock price, and so you would pay multiple billions of dollars for a couple $100 million in revenue. And even now, they're $5 or $6 billion in revenue and they're $95 billion in market cap. And so that's why Intuitive has stayed independent all these years. And so the pressure to hit the quarterly number, if you miss the number and the stock, halved, then it would be a great time for J&J or another company to come in and buy it. And so the pressure to hit those numbers was intense. At the same time, over the dot-com bust in 2001, 2002, and then in 2007, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act came through, and so it really impacted capital sales. You actually had to install the device and have it accepted, have it signed. So it wouldn't be like, and I think those rules have relaxed a little bit now, but back in that time, you had to have the system installed or at least accepted by the customer to recognize the revenue. So I got a call late on the last day of the quarter that said, hey, we're not going to get this last system. And it was in Pittsburgh. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, the moving truck grounded out on the steep streets of Pittsburgh. And it's like 5 blocks away, and it's a union shop, and we can't get it. It's gonna be tomorrow till we get it. I was like, we need that system. And so we had amazing sales reps, and they went and got cash out of their ATM and paid the dock workers at UPMC to go and push 3 crates filled with DaVinci 5 blocks, and so that the dock manager could sign it so we could recognize the revenue. And that was the level of commitment. And those kind of stories, there's literally hundreds of those type of stories, and that's what I'm going to write about.
That's amazing. And those are the kind of things that I live for, to hear about. And I got to experience them. I think this is what got me into startups was, when I left medical school, I don't know, God must love me, because my first gig was, I think, and I say this because I know that a lot of the people who are listening to this are like early in their career. We've all dealt with like lousy recruiters who like knocked our confidence and belief in ourselves and everything. But I was trying to like make my way in an industry, and I was told like, oh, you're going to have to start out, like, no offense to anybody, but like, work in a distributorship, a small one, durable medical equipment, everything. You can't get into robotics. And my first gig was in robotics. And some of the things that like so first of all, I worked with Chris Sells, Prentice, these guys who came out of Intuitive. So those are the people that I got like my foundation laid by. So I thought that was normal. The other thing was that some of the early up and coming people like Robert Breedlove, Matt Afshari, Adam Krasowski. There's this wild story. I believe it was Adam Krasowski. No, it was Sean Stewart and Robbie Breedlove, where in the middle of like this insane snowstorm blizzard in Texas, they needed to complete a case. And so they risked their lives, literally driving out to the middle of nowhere. They got out of their cars, did a handoff of the robot, and then went and completed a case. So like that stuff I just absolutely love. Like you don't hear stories like that, no offense, in the SaaS world and tech world, because it's just not the same,
No.
you know?
Lonnie Smith, the then CEO of Intuitive, introduced me to an investor named Ace Greenberg, and he had Ace had a famous saying. He hired PhDs, which they were poor, smart, with a deep desire to be rich, and so I looked at a lot of different type of people, but they all had the same thing, that a lot of them grew up poor, or without a whole lot of resources, as I did on a family farm, or grew up in a family business, something where they had to work insane hours and without a lot of money, and so they understood this was an opportunity unlike any other. And I think you look at those kind of people, and the resilience, the work ethic, the pain tolerance, as I mentioned before, those are the kind of people that are really successful. And so, in this kind of environment, there's people that are successful in different types of companies. And so, but in an early stage startup, it requires a certain level of commitment and a personality to be successful.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Well, early and Intuitive, one of the things I heard was, would you say that Intuitive started getting traction, like serious traction in the market, like around 03, 04?
Yeah.
So when that happened, I heard stories that like a lot of times a rep would walk into a hospital and they would say like, where have you been? We've been waiting for an Intuitive rep to come by. And so obviously at that time, like it was still difficult to sell, right? Mm-hmm. But one of the things was that there is so much pressure about hitting your number that like, I think your training lasted maybe a month and a half, correct?
6 weeks.
6 weeks. Okay. 6 weeks. Okay. And then, and so a full quarter is 12 weeks. So then after your training is done, you had half a quarter to hit your number. And if you didn't, you were out. Is that true?
No, that's urban legend.
Oh, that's urban legend. What was it, like 2 quarters?
Well, I would say this, that, if you look at, there's some strong feelings about Intuitive, on both ends of the spectrum. People that think it's the greatest company in the world, people that don't care for it at all. And I think that's, at some part, goods and bad. I think we decided on people very quickly. Did you have the work ethic? Did you have the ability to articulate the value propositions? Did you have the ability to just continue to, even though they might have said, we've been waiting for an Intuitive rep, it was still really, really hard to sell it in a time frame. And so on one hand, we made decisions on people and said, it's not going to work. On the other hand, we could have waited longer with people. We could have given them more resources. And so I think that has led to people with some really strong feelings about Intuitive. And so, given them, it's always nice when you can look back 10 years ago, 20 years and say, well, I would have done that differently. But in the midst of it, where there's a tremendous pressure to put up a financial result, and you have somebody that's not as efficient and not as productive as other teammates, you tend to make decisions, fairly decisively and quickly. And so that's kind of the wrap. But to hit it the first quarter, that's urban legend.
Yeah, and I don't know. Like there's a lot of things that the way that Intuitive operated in 2000s, along with many other companies, that they can't do that these days, right? But I feel like, for me recently, I finished Walter Isaacson's book on Elon Musk. who like revolutionized like car manufacturing, right? Not just like the electric car, just like how you manufacture a car and stuff. And there's a price you have to pay for that level of innovation, and it's not fun. And there's, some things on the professional side, it's like borderline abuse even, but that's like the price you pay. And I think that when you are, people talk about creating new categories and disruptions, like, it's like this fun, exciting thing. It's all out war. It's not easy or fun. It's very, very brutal, and usually even when a change is good, people go into it like kicking and screaming, right?
Well, if you just look at Intuitive from a different lens and say, there's a finite pie of healthcare dollars, and look at the transfer of wealth and the transfer of healthcare dollars from physician to physician, from hospital to hospital, from company to company started. And now you look at Intuitive's larger, significantly larger than Ethicon, and significantly larger than Covidian. And so it's a finite pie of how much a hospital is going to spend on surgical instruments. And so, there was a lot of people that were attacking us from every conceivable level.
Give us some examples of that, because, one of the things that, again, when you're trying to challenge the status quo, it's not only this status quo you're challenging, but like the people who are making money off of the status quo, right? So what was some of the trench warfare like with Ethicon in the early days?
Very interesting. I can't attribute it to Ethicon or to anybody. I have my opinions, but there was a concentrated PR effort against robotics. There was Wall Street Journal articles about complications and unproven technology, and certainly early on, you look at the political and financial impact that an established company has on the societies, on ACS, on the urology societies. They stay with the entrenched technology because the entrenched technology has the money to support their organization. And so we'd go to symposiums and speeches where people would just say, this is malpractice if you use it. And so those are the type of things where there was just such a political element to it. And then, of course, people tried to bundle stuff and bundle all the products together. There was all kinds of, really it's about the money. All the training centers, you may have recalled centers of excellence that were out there. Those are funded by millions of dollars. And we, Intuitive never really participated in that early on. And we had our own training center. And so, we didn't donate millions and millions of dollars to hospitals. And so, those entrenched technologies are always difficult to disrupt because there's a tremendous economic benefit, and it's usually couched in a clinical argument. Well, the new technology is not clinically as adept or clinically proven, but really it's an economic argument. And so those were some of the challenges we had to overcome.
On the sales side, there was a lot of really effective business development tactics. Like one of them, the most famous one is, you go and demo the technology to surgeons and everything. Hospitals don't want to buy it. And you just go to the competing hospital and say, hey, if you acquire this robot, like these surgeons will bring over like 20% of your cases. Can you kind of dive a little bit more into like, what was the generation of that, and other tactics and strategies that Intuitive used in the early days to drive product adoption?
So I'll give you two tools that I feel like, I always am hesitant to say, I did this or I did that, because it was a team effort. There were so many people that were involved in this, but I'll give you two specific examples, personal examples from my experience. So, late 2000, early 2001, I'm trying to sell systems into Houston. And so we're in cardiac surgery. I go to Methodist, which was the DaVinci shop, and I go to the Cooley shop at St. Luke's. And so whenever I would fly to a new market, I would always call on two or three accounts at the same time. And not only because it was, valuable use of my time, but because there was a competitive vibe, like who's going to be first. And so, and we would try to quantify what is the power and what is the economic benefit of being first to market. And so if you look at the early value of Intuitive, there was a correlation between new technology, high tech, and quality of care. So if you had the latest technology that nobody else had, your quality of care was better. And so you would get, expand your catchment area. There's a whole economic argument to that. And so I pushed that in myself. And as I started to manage people in the organization, that was an important part. And then I spent probably 8 or 9 months trying to sell these 2 hospitals, and was told that I was going to be fired if I didn't sell them by the end of the quarter. So it was my first time being threatened to be fired at Intuitive. And I got an Excel spreadsheet, and I listed every single thing that I thought that needed to be done to sell these robots. And I put an X on each one of them. And that's the genesis, if you've ever heard of the Xbox. That's where it came from. So I realized that I had missed 3 or 4 steps. And so we started to use that tool, pretty religiously. And so those are just some of the tools. As I became a director and a VP, and there was a tremendous amount of pressure to hit the number from a capital perspective, I started a thing called a deal rip. And so I got my ASMs together, and I said, sell me on why you think they're going to make a decision on your timeline. And so what have you done? We would use the Xbox. We would say, and there it comes back to hope is not a strategy. Like, I really want you to do it. And sales reps have a worldview that whatever they're selling is the most important thing. And an administrator, of course, has multiple things they're working on. And so, you had to have impending events. You had to have compelling reasons why people would act on your timeline versus their timeline. And so those deal rips served as a litmus test for me to go back to Jerry and to Lonnie and say, this is how many we're going to sell for the quarter. And so that became part of their culture. And I think a part of the culture of a lot of companies in the industry.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely, the Xbox I'm definitely familiar with, and I've heard like different versions of it, so I don't know like how exactly, like it all got brought together. Did you work with anybody else on that, or like, so like there's that, and then there's deal rip, like I won't mention the name, but like for deal rip, there's somebody who was like not even early Intuitive, and they were like taking some credit. I'm like, dude, don't even start. Like you had nothing to do with that.
Yeah, it's so funny. I was sitting with a company. I won't mention them, and they were. I was doing a consulting gig, and a sales rep stood up and said, "I have a tool that I've used and developed, and I think we ought to use it." And so they introduced the Xbox, and I just laughed. I was like, I remember doing that in 2001, and but like any good tool. I may have been the first person to do it and developed it, but people have taken it and become, even within early Intuitive, we modified it and made it much better. And I'm sure that people have integrated it into their businesses and improved it over time. But the origination was when I was trying to sell Methodist and St. Luke's. That's how I first used it.
Got the other one is deal rip, and I actually did. I have a concept of which I did once this year with Joseph Othman and Sean Sear, which is Deal Rip Live. I want to do more of those. The only problem, so the concept was that we get reps to submit real deals, and then we strip them of the company, of the hospital, everything. So it's like anonymized.
Right.
But when I was trying to do more of them, like it's just really hard to get more people to submit it. So like, I might try an attempt this year. I just want to, it's kind of like ESPN game day analysis is, I just want to make this industry fun. But deal rip, I feel like, is such an important thing. And I remember when I left Mazor, I went to other companies and they didn't really do that. And I was like, and even now with my own program, like I'll talk to reps and territory managers, and I'm like, well, who are you reviewing your deals with? And they're like, well, just me and my manager. I'm like, that's it? I was like, well, how are you, stress testing these deals? And I feel like that's such an important thing. It's like a very spiritual experience. What were some of the most iconic deal rips that come to mind from Intuitive?
Well, my very first one was probably 2003, 2004. The very first one I did was in Atlanta. And I think there were 6 of us in the room. So this is super early Intuitive. We're just.
Do you remember who was in the room by any chance?
I'd have to. I think maybe Mike Morawski was there. Was one of the early ones. Henry Charlton, what was an area sales manager.
Yeah, I connected with Henry. He's great. We've been trying to get him on the show, but the stars haven't aligned yet. So we'll hopefully have him on soon.
He's a phenomenal salesperson and manager, and has done great things with his career. But I guess let me back up on the deal rip for a second and just say, I think there's a couple of purposes. One is, the power of intellectual and experiential diversity. And so when you have unrelated people with different life experiences and different methodologies look at the same business problem, they come at it from different ways. Chris Sells and I are a great example. We were great friends, and both highly successful, but we approached the business totally differently. I was very process oriented. You do it the same way, or do the same things very effectively. He was an artist, and probably one of the best capital equipment salespeople that I've ever been associated with. And so if you bring those two differing views together and you say, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Whereas you and your manager probably have the same view of how to get things done. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that under high pressure environments, most people revert to, I want it to happen so badly. And I need it to happen that I convince myself that it will happen. And so that, and what happens is they say, we're going to get it, we're going to get it, we're going to get it right until the last week. And they say, oh, we're not going to get it. And so you surprise the organization. And one of my management mottos has always been, I'll take good news, I'll take bad news, but I don't want to be surprised. And so the deal rip was a way to really get grounded in reality. So what you want as a sales rep or a manager or CEO doesn't matter. It's what the customer wants. And it's the customer's timeline. And so the art of sales is trying to figure out how to make your timeline the customer's timeline. And if you can meld those two together, you're going to be highly successful. And so that was the purpose of the deal rip. They did sometimes, we integrated an element of, I suppose, fun was the initial intent, like a gladiator vote. Do you remember the movie Gladiator where they voted?
I integrated the same thing into Deal Rip Live because it just makes it, people want to be entertained.
Right. And so, but the interesting thing is when you have a group of super type A, highly competitive people and you get voted down. I had people storm out of the room like, you watch, I'm going to show you. I'm like, perfect. And at that point, my job was to provide them all the resources that they would need to make it happen. So, but we had we had a rep in the Northwest that got up and was so nervous he passed out in front of the room, and so there's all kinds of stuff that happened, but it was a great environment. We would do it twice a quarter, and I think people really understood and started to learn how to sell a big ticket capital.
That's amazing. What I got to dig a little deeper. We got to get in some juicy stories here. Tell us some more iconic, memorable deal rips. And, So like I remember being in a deal rip where a guy was going through his deal and I couldn't tell if he was, and when I was at Missouri, I carried the bag for a year and a half, and I moved into corporate and became the US marketing manager. So I would, help organize the deal rips. I would be mainly in the back of the room, just like observing and listening. And I was a young kid. I was like 27, 28 years old. And I just remember one guy, like he was on the verge of either tears or passing out, because it's really intense. And for those who are like wondering, like, what's the big deal? The thing with deal rip is that, like, aside from going through an Xbox approach, you have to check off like things are needed with the deal. Like, do you have a clinical champion? Do you have a timeline? Do you have all these things? You are opening like your business up to the entire room of your peers, your boss, your boss's boss, the marketing team, like everybody. So it's like really intense. It's really, really intense. And I think that it'll expose every weakness you have. Like if you have a weakness of getting too excited about deals, if you have a weakness of being too pessimistic, like whatever it is, right? What were some other deal rips where I think what I'm looking for is borderline entertaining deal rips, but that there's a lesson in there.
So one of the as a manager, one of the goals that's good to have is that if you can develop a culture where your organization becomes self-policing. And so you don't, it's kind of the players only meeting in the NFL. They're a self-policing organization. You don't need coaches. You don't need managers to come in there. And so probably and I won't get into too many specifics, but I would say the most entertaining ones were when people lied in front of their, stretched the truth.
What did they lie about? Oh, no. I'm holding you to what you said. What did they lie? Like some examples of things they lie about. And the reason why I say this is because salespeople at some point start to believe their own BS.
Well, they do.
And it's dangerous to the organization because, again, it sets a precedent of how to think. And if you don't, squash that out, you have other reps who start doing that and proliferating that behavior, right? So what are some examples?
So probably the most lively ones were, so the format was this. You would come up and let me just back up a second. I agree with you, Omar, on one thing. The most difficult thing to do is to open your business to your peers and to role play with your peers, because you can fudge stuff in front of customers. They don't know, you're selling them, but when you're doing it in front of somebody that knows it as well as you do, and you don't quite, you make a mistake. I mean, that's really intimidating, an intimidating environment. And so the deal rep, probably the most entertaining ones were I'd sit on the back row, and really my role at that point had come down to like, okay, I'm going to save somebody up front from themselves, because instead of the format was that they would come up and have, 5 to 10 minutes to present their deal. These are all the things all the core activities that I've done to drive the business forward. Here are the core activities that I have scheduled, and here's why I think it'll sell by the end of the quarter. And in the beginning, people would be polite, and then we would the deliverable, we would give 3 activities that they should do by the time we would meet 6 weeks later. And if they had done those 3 things, and then they would have a best chance to sell it, and then we would gladiator vote. Well, there were times when somebody would come up and particularly on the second one, where they had not done the 3 things, the 3 core activities, and they would try to lie about it, and like, oh, I couldn't get to them, or they weren't available. And then you have a self-policing organization that just starts to rapid fire questions to those people. And that's why, sometimes I would be like, okay, time out, or this is like, throwing Christians to the lions in the Coliseum.
What were the 3 core activities?
It could be anything. It could be impending events. It could be starting a red line. It could, people would be like, here's a great question that would come from a dealer. People say, for sure, I give it 90% chance. And so we would ask a question, what is their contract process? And like, who has to sign it? Who has to review it? And there's 6 weeks to go in the quarter, and it's an 8-week process. So first of all, how do you reconcile that difference? And then what's your plan to accelerate the legal process to get this signed? And so it's not all about just clinical support and being in the OR. It's about being in the executive suites and driving it forward. And so those are the kind of questions that would come out, and really we would push people on.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to call it a lost art. There's better technology and tools available today than back then, right? I mean, just like something as simple as like, HubSpot, where you can, you have a pipeline, you can have content. It's very easy to have like great tools. I mean, a great sponsor of this podcast is Clary. So Clary has like revenue intelligence. They plug into your CRM and help you predict pipeline. I feel like one of the things that a lot of novices don't do is think more about pipeline velocity and how do you take, like, for example, 3 meetings and make them into 1. Why do you think reps struggle with that?
I think that, and that is actually, it's so funny you said, that's one of the core tenets of early intuitive is how do you consolidate meetings? If you can take 3 into 1, you're going to hyper accelerate the business. And so I would say that most reps come in off on their back foot a little bit. Like, I would say a lot of reps are not comfortable in the C-suite. And so they're like, okay, like, let me give you a specific example. So they're talking to the CEO and they say, well, like, who would be the key person to lead this? And they say, well, the VP of marketing is really going to lead this initiative with the hospital. Okay, so an average rep says, okay, and then I'm going to go and find the VP of marketing. A good rep would be like, okay, could you introduce me? Could you, introduce me on VP? A great rep, some of the early Mike Hodgkiss, one of the greatest sales reps I've ever met in my entire career, would say, can we either walk down to that person's office or can we call them on the phone and bring them here? And that's the essence of taking 3 meetings or 3 activities into 1. And so if you continually do that and you use your champions to try to hyper accelerate the process, and while I'm here, I'm going to try to meet as many people and drive it forward. And I would ask myself, even when I was a sales rep, I asked myself, did I drive the business forward today? Or did I just like check one of the boxes? And the days that I really drove the business forward, I had such a sense of accomplishment and such a sense that I was really moving things forward in a direction that I wanted. And so I think that was one of the things that I've always used in my career.
Yeah, so I actually had the pleasure of working with Mike Hodgkiss back in the day at Missouri. He's a great sales exec. He's also hilarious because is he from Philadelphia?
Unfortunately, they're all Eagles fans up there. Brent and all.
He has
Mike. I still like him.
Mike, but he's got the best accent. And me being from Texas, like when I hear these Northeast accents are so interesting. I just remember that one time. Again, Mike, I want to ask you some stories about Mike, because he had a phenomenal, like an epic story out of Intuitive about turning around the territory. But one of the funnier ones I remember is that, like, sometimes when you take, surgeons to dinner or something, they get a little out of control, on like what they order. And like, you can't say like at dinner, like, oh, don't order that. Right. And I remember our accountant was on the phone with Mike, and I hear a speaker, and she was just like, Mike, what the hell is this? Like, what, like, how are we going to reimburse the bill? And I just heard Mike going, hey, I don't know what to tell you. Like, they were out of control. I couldn't control them. Like, sorry, this is probably a bad accent, but it was amazing. But Mike, when he came to Missouri, so here's my experience in Missouri with Intuitive salespeople. There's 2 kinds. The kind like Mike that came in and succeeded and did well, and the other kind who were kind of riding the coattails of Intuitive Surgical, and they thought they were really good, and they came to Missouri and started from ground zero, and they were not good, and they got throttled, like bad. So Mike at Intuitive, the story I heard about Mike was that he had a real bad territory and just turned it around. Can you tell us some like war stories about Mike.
Yeah, I'll tell you, there's one in particular that is probably the most, I mean, it really set for me the litmus test of what like world-class capital sales reps are all about. So I get a call from Mike, said, "Hey, would you fly up to Philly and help me close this deal?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I hop on an airplane, and I forget what hospital it was, but I go up there, and I'm thinking, okay, we're going to negotiate with the CEO. We're going to figure it out, and I have lots of stories about how I would do that with sales reps. I get in there. Mike has 18 signed letters from physicians that they're going to go to the competing hospital if the CEO doesn't buy it. So, the close was like, tink, he had done everything. And so, you realize when you have somebody that's that talented, there's no closing. Like he did all of the advanced work and it closes itself because at that point, a surgeon or a CEO, understands that in order to achieve his or her business model, they need this technology. And so, of course, they're going to do it. And it just comes down to, are you going to do it now or are you going to do it later? And so that's the only question that you're answering. And so I was so impressed. I remember getting back on the airplane thinking what I could do in my career if I had 30 people like that. And I did. And some of the most amazing capital sales. Bo Adams, I don't know if you know Bo in the Southeast, phenomenal.
Yep. I
think he just took a VP of sales job today with Dan Carl, but just a phenomenal, relentless Mike Morawski. I could go on and on and on about people that were just phenomenal salespeople, believed in what they were doing, had a process, and executed on it, and so that was a great time to be part of the organization.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. What were the things roughly how many salespeople did you hire at Intuitive? Roughly yourself.
Well, I think I stopped interviewing everybody that came into the organization in maybe 2008, 2009. Up until that point, I interviewed everybody.
In your career, is it safe to say you've probably hired, managed, mentored like hundreds, maybe a little over 1,000? Okay, so for you to say that like Mike is one of the best capital salespeople that you know, what makes you say that? Like, what is the criteria and the persona that kind of makes that person?
Well, he melds an incredible work ethic, an attention to detail, a clinical expertise with a process, and so it's half art, half science. And first of all, he's a personality that people want to buy from. That always helps. But he would take the deal rip, the capital sales process, and he would execute on it so flawlessly. And he had a tremendous work ethic. He always had a pipeline that was amazing. And so, one of the things that happens with sales reps is that they get so hyper focused, and it happened to me. You get so hyper focused on a particular sale or a particular market that you forget to prospect. And so you come into the end of the quarter and you may have sold something, but you look at your pipeline, you're like, oh man, this is going to be ugly. And that's the whole hit, miss cycle. And the thing about Mike is that he would always balance and have a full pipeline every quarter. And that's really unusual for people to be able to manage sales that are different in different places in the cycle. And so when you're involved in a capital equipment sale, towards the end, it gets pretty exciting, and you're going to get this done. Imagine taking time out of your day to go cold call somebody who's giving you the same objections. I'll never buy that. I'll never do that. I mean, imagine the discipline it takes to do that, because you know that you have to have the early funnel to fill your pipeline. And I think that's one of the things that distinguished him and others. Chad Zaring's another one, just just
another guy to work with.
Just absolutely phenomenal capital equipment sales rep, and so those are some of the things that really distinguished them.
What were some things, when you were at Intuitive, the people that you interfaced with the most, I believe it was Lonnie and Jerry, correct?
Yep.
What were some things that you learned from them?
I'll say, excuse me, Jerry is one of the, big influences in my career. And I just told my daughter, I'll just share you, I could tell you so many different things, but, certainly the intensity and just the willingness to say we are not going to lose, that we are going to hit this number, and to put the process and the work ethic around it. But, my daughter, I have two daughters, three daughters in college, but two at the same school. And they're both in executive positions with their sorority. And so they called me last week and they asked me for some advice on what they could do. And so one of my children wanted to just let it, work its way through. And Jerry always had a saying, and I told them this, I truly believe it, like great execs never pass up an opportunity to lead. And, so most people just lean back and say, hey, let's just see how this works out. And great executives always take the opportunity to be a leader. And so I gave them that advice and said, I learned that 30 years ago, 25 years ago from Jerry McNamara. And there's a lot more, but that's one that just happened a week or two ago. And so I think it's one of the central core themes of my career is that I've always tried to be a leader. I've never passed up an opportunity to be a leader if it presented itself to me.
And I'm very fortunate to have I gotten to meet Jerry really just through the phone and Zoom a few times and everything. He's actually been very helpful as just to give me some advice and and thoughts on what I'm doing. I never met Lonnie. Is Lonnie still alive?
Yeah. Retired, but alive.
Got it. That's great. Oh, hopefully, I don't know if that's possible, but hopefully one day I'll hopefully get him on the show. There's some people that it'll never happen. I think there's a lot of people posting to that they live kind of quiet private lives. They want to keep it that way. But one thing I would hear about Lonnie was just his relentless pursuit of perfection, and then more importantly, the competitive nature of we're going to go for all the market, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly one of the more intense people. I think he softened, after I left, towards the end. But one of the most intense managers, and I certainly had my disagreements, with Lonnie and Jerry about, how to treat customers, how to treat people, and some of the business decisions. But I will say this, that, if you look at my professional maturation process, kind of professionally growing up in Intuitive has been invaluable to me because, Lonnie was so fiscally disciplined and so financially on top of it and so process oriented. Maybe not as people oriented as myself or others, but really understand this is what we have to do. And not only from a commercial standpoint, but also from an R&D and a forward thinking. I mean, just to give you, I'll just give you one thing about what an amazing forward thinker he was. I wish I would have listened to him, by the way, when I tell you this story. I used to get Intuitive options, and I would call them Confederate dollars. Because they were useless. I joined in 2000. I never had an option.
Yeah, I want to put it into context for everybody because I was pulling it up and looking at it. So Intuitive from, let's see, 2000. So 2000, the stock was trading at $2.
Yep. In
2009, it was up to 11 or 12 bucks. So most of the time that Intuitive in the early 2000s, the stock was trading, at or around $7 to $10. So not much, right? Not a big market cap.
I'll tell you a quick story about that. So I won in 2001. Somebody else won the Director of the Year award, and they gave him a Panerai watch. And I was like, wow, I've always wanted a Panerai watch. So the next year, 2002, I think I win MVP or something, who knows. And I get up to the stage. I'm like, I tell my wife I'm going to get a Panerai. I'm all excited. And they hand me an envelope. I'm like, what is this? He goes, well, we gave you options. I'm like, I don't want options. I want a watch. And so I bought a house with those options, by the way. But so fast forward like 3 or 4 years later, and I'm taking over I'm a regional VP. I'm taking over as US VP of sales, and I win the regional VP. I walk up on stage, and Jerry McNamara says to me, you do realize this is the last award of your career. Like, you're moving into a management role that they don't give awards to people like us. And he said, so this is the last one. I bought you a Panerai watch. I'm like, I don't want a Panerai. I want the options. And so it was, I still have that Panerai watch. But yeah, I used to call them Confederate dollars. It was difficult to imagine that the stock was going to take off. And Lonnie showed me a spreadsheet that he had done. This is maybe 2005, 4, 5, 6, something like that, where our stock would be $750 a share in the next 7 or 8 years. And I was like, you've lost your mind. And but he knew what was going to happen. He could figure out that the market would respond if people continued to execute at that level. And just a great forward thinker and a great manager. I think that the lessons I've learned from him have just been invaluable to me.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I think, again, it's interesting when you kind of look back on the decisions we make and how we did things. Something I didn't ask, like in the 2000s, how when you were at Intuitive, roughly, like how old were you? Were you in your like 20s, 30s?
I was in my mid 30s.
Mid 30s. Got it. So, one of the other things that I heard a lot about Intuitive was, the importance of like clinical helping to sell capital. What was that like? Because I think a lot of times salespeople, they kind of get this misconception of like great salespeople are just great closers. Singular one-time event where you go in a negotiation and close. And as you kind of pointed out with Mike Hotchkiss, which is like it's a whole, like sales is more of it's a process, right? And developing as much momentum so that it closes itself. Right. What were some of the levers that salespeople back then were taught to use, aside from just them turning multiple meetings into one, et cetera? Can you kind of go more into details on those processes?
Well, I think that this is another thing that Lonnie said to me early on that I never believed. He was like, there will be a day when people will use this so often that we'll give them the robot because they'll use it so often. And so I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy named Doug McClung. Doug McClung.
No.
MCCLUNG, phenomenal guy. I think he's probably been there, I don't know. 22, 23 years. And he started as one of my very first CSRs. And I think he had 7 states and 4 robots. And the robot for the quarter did 5 or 6 cases. So each robot did 1 case, and he would fly around to cover cases. And I think he's a clinical VP for him now. So been there a long time, seen the company come from startup to where it is today. But so early on, when there's very little utilization, it's hard to build a credible story that this has clinical value if no one's using it. And so if you look at, we talk about the excitement and the amazing ability of ASMs, the capital equipment sales force, but it's really the clinical sales reps that drove that business forward. And that's having the personality and the force of belief and the force of personality to go into the OR and work people through, all of the problems, the fiddle factor that we talked about previously, where, I'll tell you a story. There were cases done. I'll tell you two stories. There were cases done early on where there was an alarm. It's called a sensor mismatch. So the robot, the computer thinks that the instruments are at a certain place and they're not. And so it's a sensor mismatch, and it would have an alarm. And the sales rep would sit there the entire case and silence the alarm. Every 10 seconds, it would go off and silence it. And there's you have to be a certain personality to be able to do that. I was in a case in New York City with a physician named Mike Argenziano, great guy. And so we start the case, and the right monitor goes blank. And so he does the case through one eye. And he's a super skilled person, but the rep kind of like talked him through that and calmed him down, said, we can still do this. You can see everything. So it takes a special person. And some of the CSRs that I've known over the years are just amazing, clinical, really, truly like some of the most clinically proficient reps that are in the industry.
Can you name some? Because again, the reason why I ask is this is another area that I think a lot of people undervalue, which is, selling disruptive technology is important, right? But like the job kind of starts after you sell, which is, you have to drive utilization of the technology, because if you don't do that, right, you have an underutilized piece of capital equipment, and people talk about that. These surgeons don't go to conferences and like hide that. They'll be like, yeah, we bought XYZ technology. It's just like collecting dust in the closet. Who are some great clinical reps that come to mind, and what made them great?
Well, I think that what made them great, somebody who's done both sides of the business, John Brentnall, also in Philly. I've got to go back through my old memories and remember some of the individual contributors. You mentioned Joseph Authman, Nick, Justin, his brother. Is also been a clinical sales rep, or I think he's moved up, and for a long time, super clinical. But I'd have to go back through my list and it'd be like old hour day. I'd be like, oh, I remember that person. Tom Higgins is a great person, like a really great rep. But I think what made CSR special is, first of all, the relational aspect. If you're a capital rep and you're talking to people that like you and know you and are comfortable with you, this is early intuitive. You're not selling anything. You always had to be in the people that didn't have it. And of course that's changed because most people have robots now. And so, but early on, you had to always be talking to new prospects. Whereas a clinical sales rep had to live in these hospitals. And so if there's an adverse outcome, or the robot doesn't work, or they set it up wrong, you can't be like, well, you know what, I'm going to go away for a week or two and let things calm down. You got to go back in there the next day. And so you have to be technically proficient, clinically proficient. I think that's really, a little bit different than the one-time capital sale. More difficult. I think there are personality types that fit that. I didn't. I was in clinical sales for a while, but I definitely fit the more capital sales personality than somebody that wanted to be in the same account or same group of accounts every day. That was not my personality, but it's an amazing people. I'm gonna have to look up some names.
Don't worry. You'll be back. You'll be back on the show for sure. No, and I think it's helpful to put that into context and understand. And again, I appreciate you spending some time with us, but I want to wrap up with like a few more questions and stories for you before we let you go. So when you look back on your career specifically, do you have any? I don't like to think about regrets, but like, do you have any things that you look back on and you say like, I could have done that differently, or or it served as like I think the times that we grow professionally are from pain, right? And so for me, like I had plenty of those moments where at Missouri, I think, I don't know, there was a period I think had it overlapped, I would have been fired. But there was like a month where one week I royally pissed off Chris Sells, and then like a week or two later, I did something else, some other stupid things, and made some mistakes, and I royally pissed off Chris Prentice. Had those overlapped, I think, and I think at the time, what was funny was one had to calm the other one down, and then like a few weeks later, it was like the reverse. So I had it overlap, like I would have been fired. But when you look back at your career, like what were some of those things at Intuitive where like it served as a point of pain that made you grow and changed you for the better?
Well, of course, I try not to, and I think that, this is really important for people. I try not to indulge in regret, because
I agree too.
It's something that will grab you and take a hold of you laying in bed. And, I wrote an article about wishing, and, the word wish, transcends time. It's past, present, and future. And, but, you can wish for something to happen, but at the same time, you can, in your quiet time going, oh, I wish I hadn't said that, or I wish I hadn't done that. And so I try to use those moments as, how am I going to be a better person? How am I going to be a more effective manager? So I would say that, the things I look back on, I would say a couple things. One is I wish I'd been more patient with people. I wish I would have balanced the uber competitive, the uber pressure-packed environment with being more patient with people. And so the people that were in the sweet spot of Intuitive, that's not where you hear the churn and burn or super environment. They loved it. It was the people that were coming up the learning curve, that were trying to figure it out, and I think we could have been more more gracious and patient with those people. And I think I've learned that over the course of my career. I have a dear friend that worked for Intuitive that I was having a drink with, and told me something that just resonated with me. One of our management sayings was, "Be hard on the business and easy on the people." And excuse me, I think there's a level of professional maturity where that makes sense. Like, okay, I can build my people, but I can be really demanding on what we're going to accomplish. And I think that's, if you talk to my direct reports, I think that's what you would come back with. Like, okay, we were going to get it done, but we laughed a lot. We had a great time, lifelong friends. Our wives knew each other. But I think that concept is really difficult for a frontline first-time manager, that differentiation. So as we put that out there, they were just hard on the people. And so the environment I created in my group didn't filter down through the organization all the time. And then I give you one last one. I think that this is a great, for your listeners that are in bigger positions where they have, big organizations. I think it's easy to get hyper focused on what you think of yourself, and you have everybody. I don't care who you are. Everybody has doubts or uncertainties about if they're doing the right thing or if the business is going to achieve its goals, and so sometimes I would be more withdrawn and just like kind of concentrating on the things I had to do. And so it comes across to individual contributors and people that don't know me as unapproachable and like standoffish or aloof. And I think great leaders always look at themselves through the lens of how people see them. And you want a friendly, outgoing, upbeat leader. And I think I've learned that over the course of time, managing people for a long, long time. I think that's one of my learnings that I wish that I had known 25 years ago. And in my own group, I was, I was positive and fun, but not always to a larger group. And so you kind of, people perceive you a different way than you perceive yourself. And so, but overall, you can't spend too much time on that. You have to spend time on saying, for me, 35 years in this industry, how do I teach as many people as possible? How do I give people some of the lessons I've learned and say, I made that mistake and I can help you. I can help you avoid that. And so that's where I derive my satisfaction from these days. But it's been an amazing industry to be in and nothing but a pure joy.
Yeah, no, Devin, I appreciate you sharing that. I think, it's hard to strike the balance, right? Yeah. Because, it's, I think it's, because I'm a new father and my kid can barely talk. So like, I'm nobody to be like, but at least sharing from my experience, it's like, it's very hard to balance strike a balance between like being approachable and fun and everything. But at the same time, like, actually I'll give you a great example is the relationship that I think, striking that balance as a parent is similar to being like a great leader in the sense, like, for example, I'm 37 years old. I'm a grown man. And so I have a great relationship with my father, right? We have fun, we golf together, everything, but he's not my buddy. He's still my father. And so there's a line that I don't cross, like even to this day. Right. And I just know that. And I think, a good example, because by the time he got to Missouri, he had, been through Intuitive and surgical and many things, but like Chris Sells, I felt like was a great example of that, where as a leader, and I see Chris Sells almost like, I have a great father, but he was like a second father figure to me. Mm-hmm. But I think Sells, he struck this balance where he was very approachable. You never felt embarrassed to go to him with like, I'm struggling with this, etc. He's like a character out of a movie. Like, he's very inspiring, but at the same time, like, you had your act together when you were around him. Like, it was a very weird thing. It was almost like you feel relaxed and comfortable with him, but at the same time, you're like on your toes and you make sure everything's buttoned up. And again, it's very hard to strike a balance. And even somebody like Chris Sells wasn't perfect. Nobody is, I think. But I think at the end of the day, I think to accomplish great things in business, and again, this is me studying, the Elon Musks of the world and Steve Jobs and everything, it requires like a level of discipline and rigor and intensity that most people aren't willing to do. And I think that there's a genetic component to this, because I think if you go back thousands of years ago, I think you'll appreciate this. There are people who were genetically wired where they could get by with 3 hours of sleep a night, 4 hours of sleep. And those are the people who are guards. In our current society today, there are people who are like extremely high testosterone. Those are the people who go into Marines. We need people like that. I think the same thing in business. Like, there are programmers and engineers who worked at Apple who can just grind themselves to the bone, and that's all they wanted to do. There are other people who can. And I think it's just finding those right people and then plugging them in, or I guess as sales would like to say, like finding the right place on the bus for them. That's
right. I think the Elon Musk story where he's flying to Europe with his family for vacation, and they have to move the Twitter servers.
Oh my God. It's one of my favorite. Let's talk about that. Yeah. So he was, so share that story. I'll play some color comments. So did you read the book, or did you? Okay. Let's talk about that. That's an example of like, that's a different phenotype,
and certainly, just for your audience, in no way, in any shape or form, am I drawing any parallels between myself and Elon Musk. But I would say that when you get into a situation where you're just going to use your force of personality to make it happen, and sometimes that's you have to go and be personally involved. So he's flying, in a jet with his family to
on holiday, family with a couple of friends,
right? And, the servers, I think, are in Seattle, and they can't move them. The Twitter servers, they can't move them, and so he turns the jet around and flies with all these people on the jet that are going on vacation, and goes and basically moves these servers himself. And
and he rents a car, packs everybody in it. Because just while on the plane, like I think people in Seattle, the people running the server, the company that housed him, they're like, we can't do it. And on the thing, he just had for them, he has these surge moments where he's like, that's BS. We can move it. Turns it around, packs his family in, and even like he like crawls through the air
ducts and does it, unhooks them himself.
And starts moving them. And then like again, this is why I get excited about a lot of the intuitive. Sorry, that's my son in the background. Intuitive stories is that like for him and his brother, when they were trying to move, they went and like found some guys at Home Depot and paid them cash, like $10K cash, to help them like get some U-Hauls and move these things.
So
you know what I mean?
I'll tell you my intuitive moment like that a little bit. So I think maybe 2002, maybe 2003. As I recall, that the capital number on the street was 12 or 13 units. And with 1 week to go, we had 1 unit installed and no pipeline, except for HCA. And I had, I won't tell you the whole story here, but I had spent a long time working on HCA and had parlayed some sales calls into a meeting with Jack Bovander, the CEO. And when I test drove him, he said, we'll buy 10. And I was like, wow, okay. So, there's a long way between the CEO saying we're going to buy 10 and actually doing it. And so I negotiated this deal to Jerry McNamara's credit. He let me negotiate it. And so it's the last week of the quarter. And part of our deal is to do this deal for 12 units, you have to take them this quarter. And they say no. And so I walk out into the hallway. Jerry's in Europe. And I said, good news, bad news. We got the contract. They'll sign it, but they won't take them until next week. And he said, I pay you to get the job done. I want them done. I want them installed this week. Call me back when you got it done, and hung up on me. And so I walk back in there. I mean, this is it's the biggest sale in the history of Intuitive to that point. And I say, no deal. I need them this week. And so, of course, it was a fairly testy meeting from there. But we ended up installing 13 of them, and originally 12, but then 13 of them on the last week of the quarter, and made the number. And so it's that kind of like, when you tell me it can't be done, like, yes, it can. Go back in there and get it done, or I'll come and do it myself. And so it's, when you have this goal and this mission in front of you, and you have the force of personality to really get it done, I think that's kind of what Elon Musk does. He believes if it can be done, because he knows if he goes and does it himself, it will get done. That's what that story gave to me. And so now he's also inspired a lot of people to do great things, which is one of the hallmarks of a great leader. And so, but that's for your audience, that's a worthwhile book to read, in my opinion.
Oh, 100%. And I tell people all the time, especially entrepreneurs, it's like, okay, some of the entrepreneurs I'm friends with, like, they're very motivated to make as much money as possible. Like as am I. Like, right. But the thing is, like, what do you do to get there? And for me, like, I have to, I'm not trying to build a $1 trillion business, but like learning from these people is important. So it's like, if you're a student of the game, you study that. Something I do want to bring up for the audience, which I think is worth understanding, is that Elon Musk actually has like an algorithm that he goes through. It's a 5-step algorithm. So it's questioning every requirement, okay, mm-hmm. Deleting any part of the process that you can that's considered stupid. The third is simplifying and optimizing the process. The fourth is accelerating the cycle time. So a lot of times, and I think Steve Jobs was also very good at this, which is if it took 6 months to do that, they found a way to put so much pressure and force that like you can do it in a month, right? And the fifth was just to automate. The thing that Elon Musk has admitted that he's probably made the most mistakes around of is to going straight to the automation process and to really go through this rigorously before you automate. And even me, like as an example with my software company, OmniCreator, me and my co-founder Daigo, we're doing a lot of things that do not scale, like directly dealing with customers one-on-one, calling them, flying and meeting them in person. And the main thing is just like, those are the things that are needed to do to create like a strong business. And more importantly, again, like it's no difference from medical device, driving strong utilization and customer success with the product. Otherwise, all you're doing is burning through the market by acquiring customers and then burning them out on the back end. But I think like you can take these lessons from a Steve Jobs and Elon Musk and embody them, even if you're like a sales rep, and just say, well, what's the forcing function that I use in my business, in my little part of the world, to make things even better, you know?
Yeah. And I think that, Elon Musk is great in terms of just like being smart enough to think of new markets and then going and execute on it. Now we look at electric cars as kind of commonplace, and every manufacturer has it. But when Tesla first came out, I mean, it was groundbreaking, and it had some significant technical challenges. I think the first Tesla had less than 200-mile range.
Yeah, it was terrible. And when they went public, even Jim Cramer. By the way, a lot of people like dunk on Jim Cramer. He's also made a lot of great picks. But back then, Jim Cramer and all the advisors on Wall Street and stuff, and people with shows were just like, "Don't buy this stock; it's a dog," And then the stock went 20 or 30% and outperformed like their opening day and did well, But I think the big thing that I take away from Elon Musk, one is like, he gets criticized, but again, not everybody's Elon Musk. So I don't recommend always doing this, but he looks at like ways to transform an entire market and then worries about a business model later for that. I think that's important. But the other side is just like, I think that it's like the 4-minute mile. Everybody said it was impossible to break the 4-minute mile. And then who was it? Roger Bannister who broke it, breaks it. In that same year, like 20 other people do it. So I think like constantly challenging things. And this is the one thing that our industry, I don't think does a good job. And I'm, at least in my own little world, trying to be a catalyst for that, which is to question how we sell and market. Like for the longest time, and even to this day, people say like, you can't sell like capital, or you can't sell devices using social media or just like, digital. And I think that's like, well, why not? Like we buy a lot of other things. Like I know people who are, they have like massive net worths who buy, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 watches without ever seeing the watch. Like I have a friend who has purchased the last like 2 or 3 Ferraris. He's never stepped in the car or the dealership. Like it's all through FaceTime, Instagram, and they just get delivered. So I'm like, why can't that be done with anything else? So I think the one thing I want to see from the industry, and that's why I have people like you on the show and everything, is to just constantly challenge like our thinking in the status quo on how we do things,
I think the interesting thing is, you look at the device industry and we kind of pride ourselves on delivering groundbreaking proprietary technology that changes patient care and the finances of hospitals. And then there's people in the industry that are resistant to new technology. As they sell new technology, they're resistant to new.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm dating myself, but I was a sales rep when the very first bag phone, the car phone, came out. People were like, I'll never use it. I used to deliver my weekly reports on a disc, and I would drive them to my manager's house. There was no internet. There was no, there was no email. It was all before that. And so, you can imagine if somebody said, well, I'm not going to use a computer. I don't think that's going to be valuable. Well, now it's become ubiquitous. And so it's the same thing with AI is certainly if you're a rep and you're not using AI, if you're not writing letters and then editing them using an AI platform, if you're not using social media to connect with your customers, you have this incredible platform right in front of you, and you're way behind the times. You might not realize it, but you are way behind the times. And I think that's one of the things that, quite frankly, I'm not a great networker. I'm working. That's my development area for 2024 is I want to be a great networker. And so when you introduced me to OmniCreator, it transformed how I articulated some of my ideas, and I had all this content that I just couldn't put into a format And so having that technology and having that software, like, just enabled me to be able to communicate with a broader audience. And I would, here's my unsolicited plug. If you're not on OmniCreator and you're on LinkedIn, you're behind the times. You need to get that program. It's very inexpensive, and it will transform the way you look at how you interact with people in the industry and your contacts. And I think it's invaluable. I've loved it.
I really appreciate you saying that. And, again, like, when Daigo and I, and Daigo really is the father of that platform. I'm just like a humble partner that's helping sell and market it. But, the whole idea is that we brought in, tools like AI to help you improve your writing, scheduling tools, a community to get engagement and everything. And the whole idea is just to amplify your ability to either develop yourself into a thought leader, sell, etc. But I absolutely agree with you, Jim. I mean, look, like, one of the biggest revolutions that we're going through right now is ChatGPT, which, for a lot of people who don't, they don't see the forest beyond the trees. That's kind of the introduction of AI to the general public so that they can start getting used to it. And I don't know how any salesperson is not leveraging that tool. And again, like, shameless plug, OmniCreator, we are integrated with ChatGPT as an API, so you can use it and literally tell, like last night I turned, we have this feature called Starlog. I turned it on and dictated something to it, and then told the AI, I was like, can you turn this into like a persuasive LinkedIn post and pull in examples from philosophy and stoicism? And it turned this like 5-sentence dictation into this like long form post. And, again, like, I'm going to pick on the industry a little bit. Okay, don't use social media. Don't use these things where your customers are already using them. Okay, use email. Most 99.9%, actually 100%, because I haven't met a single sales rep, VP, etc., who I read their sales emails and I was like, oh, this is really good.
Right.
Most of them are terrible. Like, including, like, I look at them and I'm like, are you surprised why it's not being open? And I'll take it. And I was just like, okay, let's not take my advice. Let's just ask AI, and I'll plug it into AI. I'm like, can you make this more persuasive? And it pulls a completely different email out. And so, like, it's almost like the AI and these tools aren't replacing these skills, they're augmenting them. And again, just like what we're expecting our customers to do with their skill set and procedures, why aren't we doing that ourselves within our own areas like marketing and sales, right?
Well, I would say this for me. I love to write. And so I was reluctant to really engage ChatGPT because I felt like it was cheating. Like, I have it write for me. But what it does, I use it as an augmentation. And so it brings in historical references that would take me hours to resource.
Same here.
And then it is a great editor. So, as you get verbose, it'll cut you down. If you say 300 words, it will do it for you. And then I go in and edit it and make it myself, because I want my content to be from, hey, I have a lot of battle scars and I want to share those with you. And AI can't give those, but it can give me examples that will show for illustrative purposes of how to do it. But I would say more importantly, here's one of the keys to being successful in business and in sales. First is you sell a product that customers want to buy, and you sell it in a way that they want to buy it. And so just imagine if you said, well, our sales model is we're going to wait for people to get on airplanes and go to conferences, and we're going to sell it that way. You'd be like, dude, you got a problem. That's not how you sell it. And so people don't read emails anymore. They don't read long form. It's the Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn post, where if you can articulate your value proposition in a very short 200 to 300 word post, you're going to resonate with your customers, because that's how they want to be informed. And then you give them an opportunity to follow up on a deeper level if they're interested. And so I delete emails by the scores.
Same here.
but I'll read somebody's post because I'm interested in what they have to say. And so I think that's what OmniCreator's done for me, and what ChatGPT has done is, as a sales rep, how can I be the essence of executive speak? How can I have an economy of words and articulate my primary message in as few words as possible so that it resonates with the right people? And I think that's where AI is really going to transform the sales process.
100%. And just to kind of, we'll wrap up shortly here. And again, Jim, I appreciate you coming on and spending time with us. But I'll give you a great example. So again, because of my business and my show, I have a foot in a lot of different spaces: structural heart, gen surge, orthopedics, etc. So in the orthopedic world, there's a journal called the Journal of Orthopedic Experience and Innovation, called JOEI, founded by the chair of orthopedics at Bronx Care. So impressive place, Ira Kirschenbaum. And on their editorial board, they have the most heavyweight orthopedic surgeons. And the whole purpose of the journal is they're fighting against, the old establishment of publishing, which the Walter Coolers of the world and Elsevier's and stuff, where they charge for your publication, charge all this. 100% of their publication is distributed through LinkedIn. So that's why you see all these clinical posts on LinkedIn, because these surgeons are like, man, I don't have to wait to, I'm a private practice surgeon. I'm not practicing out of the hospital or out of HSS. So I can crowdsource my case to the best minds in surgery and change my process the next day. Okay. So that's already amazing as it is. Well, JOEI has a free, and I'm attending it again tonight. Every Wednesday, they have this thing called FOMO, fear of missing ortho. And they have a Zoom call where they take one of the cases or one of the publications from their journal, and they have an open discussion on Zoom with everybody, where anybody can join and ask questions. And I've been on these calls, and there's 80, 90, 100 surgeons live on a Zoom call. And I open up and I go through to see which sales reps do I have. I got to give a little props to ConMed. ConMed, helps sponsors these, and, some of their people join. But other than that, I don't see any reps. And I tell these reps, I'm like, you can literally go on the Zoom call with the most powerful people in orthopedics. And I've done this before, where I've asked a question, and some reps are like, well, I'm really nervous. Guess what I do sometimes? I'll read the publication ahead of time. I'll feed that publication into ChatGPT, tell it to be an orthopedic surgeon, and say, what are some interesting questions I can ask out of this? Yeah. And I start I'm training my mind on, how do I think like an orthopedic surgeon? Then I jump in this, I'll put a question in, and they'll say my name, oh, hey, Omar Khatib has a really good point in this one question, and it'll generate this whole discussion. And now all these surgeons know who I am by name. Right. But yet no reps are doing this. They're waiting to do a 20-second pitch at the scrub sink while the surgeon's mentally trying to prepare for a case. It just doesn't make sense to me,
I think we haven't even scratched how the technology is going to be used. And I think that, it's going to transform this industry, not only from a sales perspective, but from a manufacturing, supply chain, and product development standpoint as well. If you're not in AI, and robotics is a great example. There's all these companies that are trying to compete with Intuitive. You're like, why? Jump forward, use AI to interface, to bridge the interface between the technology, the surgeon, and the patient, and that will transform the marketplace.
100%, Jim. I really appreciate it. I can hear my wife knocking on the door because we're trying to, but great having you on the show. Definitely want to have you back, because I know you have some great content that's going to be released in January, just on some of the leadership methodologies that you have and some other things. But just in general, quick plug, where can people find you if they want to connect?
I'm at Jim Alecxih on LinkedIn, and my email is jima@theag.net. And I'd love to talk to you. As you said, I'm going to release a series on decision making. And, I look at some of the decisions I've made and I'm super happy with, and some of the decisions I've made I'm not. And how do you make those decisions? And I think that what I'm most anxious about is some of the comments, and, to really get that dialogue. So I'm anxious to do that. And thank you, Omar, for, being so encouraging to me And I love your content, and I love what you're doing, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Jim. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. I want to thank all the listeners for joining today. Be sure to go follow Jim. And what I recommend is go to his LinkedIn profile, connect or follow him. And then on the right-hand side, they'll see a little bell icon. Turn that on so you can get all the notifications for when he publishes his content. This is another episode of The State of MedTech. If you haven't already, subscribe, give us 5 stars and write a review. And we'll see you all next. Thank you for enjoying another epic episode of The State of MedTech. If you're feeling inspired and love this episode, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you never miss an episode. And be sure to give us 5 stars and write a short review, because that helps more people discover this amazing community of ours. If you're a company who has an executive that you'd like to be on the show, or perhaps you want to sponsor one of the episodes, shoot us an email at hello@katibandco.com. Take care, and we'll see you next time.